Certainty is a strange thing. Jean Baudin was one of the greatest minds of the 16th century, and one of the most significant political philosophers of all time. No one can claim to be truly politically informed without at least a passing familiarity with his work. He wrote widely on sovereignty and republics, but he was also an avowed believer in witches, who he discussed in depth in his seminal pamphlet, The Demon Mania of the Sorcerers. Baudin entertained no doubts in this regard, and sneered at any who questioned the existence of witches as master doubters, who doubt whether the sun is bright, or ice is cold, or fire is hot. Voltaire, showing a touch more scepticism, later wrote that doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. It should be a rare condition, but it's incredibly common. In an open letter to Leon Trotsky on the 1st of February 1940, James Burnham wrote, "You are on treacherous ground, Comrade Trotsky. The doctrine of class truth is the road of Plato's philosophers' kings, of prophets and popes and Stalins. For all of them also, a man must be among the anointed order to know the truth. It leads in a direction diametrically opposite to that of socialism, of a truly human society. Beware, beware, comrades, of anyone or any doctrine that tells you that any man or group of men holds a monopoly on truth, or on the ways of getting truth." It's a cliche that those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it, but it's also a truism. Not only were Trotsky and all his ilk proven just as wrong as Baudin, but those who seek to monopolise truth today, the fact-checkers, and those who want to adjudicate on misinformation, came, just as their forebears did, from the political left. There seems no end to these pocket tyrants, and more worryingly, their power and influence matches their derangement and their insatiable hunger for control. This phenomenon has only been growing in recent years, and those pushing the issue are getting more open and brazen about their intent. One bone of contention is over the recent pandemic, where our liberal elites are keen to control the narrative, despite getting virtually all the big decisions wrong. YouTube have announced that they will partner with the WHO to police thought on this issue, and the World Economic Forum, an international group that works to shape global, regional and industry agendas, is also overt about their intent. They are focusing on health misinformation and anti-vaccine content in the new branch that they've established, the Global Coalition for Digital Safety, which sounds rather like the terrifying Committee of Public Safety in revolutionary France, the organ that crushed free speech in opposition, dealing death on a horrific scale. The new despots of the WEF naturally think that they can adjudicate on best practices for new online safety regulations through establishing more deliberate coordination between the public and private sector. This step, which they claim is needed, will result in the state controlling private companies. When it comes to the online giants, however, Silicon Valley seems just as keen on controlling the narrative as governments and busybody institutions like that run by Klaus Schwab. Climate change is, of course, another divisive issue. Few doubt its existence, but there's much disagreement over its severity and over what's the best approach. Britain's new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has already shown which side his bread's buttered by promptly banning fracking. We're in the middle of an energy crisis, and the solution is right under our feet. But Sunak would rather turn his back on that to placate the sort of spoiled and clueless activists who throw soup on a Van Gogh. But then Rishi's a billionaire, so he doesn't have to worry about his energy bills. And he's turned to the usual solution: just tax poor people. Large numbers of esteemed scientists have spoken up to oppose the accepted narrative on climate change. People like Patrick Moore, Bob Carter, Bjorn Lomborg, Michael Schellenberger, and Gregory Wrightstone. But they've largely been ignored in favour of people like Greta Thunberg, who's now showing her true colours by denouncing capitalism as well, spitting out clueless platitudes about imperialism and colonialism while doing so. The girl doesn't even go to school, yet the world fawns over her while she lectures them on science, economics and history, subjects which she knows nothing about. Yet the powers that be are jumping on the Greta bandwagon. Google has announced that it's uniting with the UN on the climate change issue. It will advance articles pushing the preferred narrative while censoring any that challenge it. And this controlling authoritarianism is spreading like a rash. PayPal have declared that they will fine their customers $2,500 if they post any articles they disagree with on social media, while Britain's Tories, who've been indistinguishable from the Labour Party for about 30 years, are ploughing on with their noxious online harms bill. It's no surprise either that Justin Trudeau and Jacinda Ardern, two leaders who've repeatedly shown an insatiable appetite for authoritarian tyranny, are both joining the crusade. Neither of those despots can ever control their glee when they're crushing their citizens' liberties. Canada, not satisfied with Bill C-16, that which forced through compelled speech, have promised to introduce a set of online harms bills which would bar any expression which, in a truly Maoist twist, undermines Canada's social cohesion or democracy. Justin Trudeau has promised to press sites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube to be more accountable in policing the content on their platforms. To coincide with this, Jacinda Ardern gave a chilling speech at the UN. The grinning despot spoke of the urgency of addressing misinformation and disinformation on the net. She used inflammatory language to sell her idea, warning of the awful dangers of hateful and dangerous rhetoric and ideology. Well, Jacinda, I think everything you say is hateful and dangerous rhetoric and ideology, so maybe you should be silenced. Ardern describes the opinions of others as weapons of war which intend to cause chaos. To people like her, speech is a weapon of war. Silence is violence. But so are words, as long as people like Ardern and Trudeau disagree with them. Ardern compares the opinions of others to deadly force. But if speech can be irresponsible, then that speech she gave surely qualifies. There's little more terrifying than a political leader who wishes to silence thought to strengthen their own side of politics. Brendan O'Neill wrote a withering response. Tyranny has had a makeover. It's no longer a boot stamping on a human face forever. It isn't a gruff, gurning cop dragging you into a cell for thinking or expressing a dangerous idea. It isn't a priest strapping you to a breaking wheel. No. Authoritarianism is well dressed now. It's polite. It has a broad smile and speaks in a soft voice. It's delivered not via a soldier's boot to the cranium, but with a caring liberal head tilt. And its name is Jacinda Ardern. All of these despots share the same goal. They want to crush views with which they disagree. They want to quash any criticism of their worldview, of their political ideology. They effectively want full control of the narrative. It's a terrifying aspiration. But the most alarming of all is that they've been joined by the state that has always taken free speech as its founding principle: America. This had already become apparent when the Department for Homeland Security had announced a disinformation governance board under the awful Nina Jankovic. As usual, those pushing for this sort of control had been guilty of a stream of misinformation themselves. Early in the pandemic, Nina Jankovic posted anti-face mask propaganda, before later performing a volte-face. She fully endorsed all the lies about Russian collusion and stolen elections, and she claimed that ISIS would be emboldened during Trump's presidency. In fact, it fell. She also dismissed claims that critical race theory was being taught in schools as disinformation for profit. Yet mountains of evidence proved her to be wrong about that too. And she claimed that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian propaganda and completely false. Yet that turned out to be 100% true as well. Yankovic had claimed that disinformation experts claimed there are multiple red flags that raise doubts about the email's authenticity, including questions about whether the laptop actually belongs to Hunter Biden. She further suggested that we should regard the laptop story as a Trump campaign product, before calling the story a Russian op and a fairy tale. But it's a fairy tale that turned out to be 100% true. And she's also shown a taste for totalitarianism. When COVID first appeared, she yelled, "So force away! Lock us down!" So these are the people who want to dominate the narrative. Control freaks who continually spout misinformation themselves. That alone should act as a serious red flag about where all this is headed. Nina's boss, Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, declared that she was eminently qualified, a renowned expert in the field, and absolutely neutral. Well, nobody's absolutely neutral. That's not just misinformation. That's a brazen pack of lies. But it's entirely typical for committed leftists to confuse their warped prejudices with objective reality. When putting forward her case, Yankovic had made clear she wanted to quash stories about Kamala Harris, AOC, Jacinda Ardern, and Ilhan Omar. Because here's the crux. They just want to stop criticism of left-wing politics, while remaining free to spread lies about right-wing figures like Donald Trump. In fact, Yankovic had already lied by claiming that leftists are subject to more censorship online than conservatives. So the woman charged with policing online disinformation spread falsehoods about the nature of the problem. Another misinformation whopper. Now, after a massive backlash, that programme was canned. But it turns out that Yankovic was just the public face of a far greater effort being pushed by the DHS. And as usual, they have no doubts about their malign intent. In February, Matt Masterson, a former DHS official and Microsoft executive, texted Jen Easterly, a DHS director, to sneer that platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain. Yeah, those idiots and their concerns about free speech. That email was part of the leak handed to The Intercept magazine, which blew this case wide open. It revealed not just their alarming actions, but also their nauseous intent. Laura Demlow, an FBI official, warned how subversive information on social media could undermine support for the US government. No, Laura. What undermines the US government is when people like you set the thought police on them. Demlow is the same official who had pressurised Facebook and Twitter to bury the Hunter Biden laptop story. That's right. She censored the truth in order to influence an election. A truly Stalinist move. And this noxious commissar still gets to decide what Americans are allowed to hear or to say. The evidence collated revealed that government officials can directly flag posts on Facebook or Instagram and demand that they get suppressed. The irony is that the moves by the DHS to police information spring from the fears about Russian collusion in the election of 2016. fears that proved ungrounded. Evidence suggests the Democrats have also colluded with the FBI to exaggerate the threat of right-wing white nationalist groups while downplaying the violence of left-wing militias and BLM splinter groups. Yet their thirst to control the narrative sparked into overdrive during the pandemic, surged again to police thought on climate change, and now seems preoccupied with protecting America's left-wing government from criticism or from any embarrassing accusations. The political nature of their intentions has been clearly stated. As they aspire to police information on racial justice, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of US support to Ukraine, all issues that would benefit from an open and honest discussion. As The Intercept concludes, how disinformation is defined by the government has not been clearly articulated, and the inherently subjective nature of what constitutes disinformation provides a broad opening for DHS officials to make politically motivated determinations about what constitutes dangerous speech. This should alarm everyone. After all, nobody lies more than politicians. So for them to assume a monopoly on truth for the rest of us is a shocking development. It's like cats deciding what's best for mice. And what's even more worrying is the subversive nature of their actions. None of this has been done openly. It's all been buried, hidden. A deeply dishonest approach that undermines their lofty talk of safety and accuracy. And further to this, there have been open efforts to subvert democracy and affect the outcome of elections. Prior to the 2020 election, tech companies like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Discord, Wikipedia, Microsoft, LinkedIn and Verizon Media met on a monthly basis with the FBI, CISA and other government representatives. They claim to want to tackle misinformation during the election, but one thing cannot be denied. Every decision they took helped the Democrats and hurt the Republicans. Ironically, it was Trump himself who signed the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Act into being in 2018, a response to a number of high-profile hacking incidents of US firms. But as is so often the case, the legislation has opened doors into avenues way beyond its original remit. Indeed, the CISA even boasted of this evolved mission. Under Joe Biden, this mission has accelerated. In fact, its whole modus operandi has shifted. Initially established to counter foreign influence, the CISA altered their stated intent by establishing a misinformation, disinformation and malinformation team designed to offer a more flexible approach. Jen Easterly, the Biden-appointed director of the CISA, was overt about how she wanted to focus on cognitive infrastructure. Her mission statement is to alter and to control what people think. And this is a two-way street. Kate Starbird, the University of Washington professor, and Vijaya Gadde, Twitter's former head of legal policy, trust and safety, literally begged the CISA director to use the agency to shape the information ecosystem. They called on the government to closely monitor social media platforms of all sizes, mainstream media, cable news, hyper-partisan media, talk radio, and other online resources. They urged for ever more interventions, and they hope to cover this up. Jeff Hale, the director of the Election Security Initiative at CISA, recommended the use of third-party agencies as a clearinghouse for information to avoid the appearance of government propaganda, using propaganda to hide propaganda. And the people employing this duplicity want to police access to truth? Shameless. Joe Biden even authorised a national strategy designed to enhance faith in government and to address the extreme polarisation of American society. But few have polarised America more than Biden himself. The document outlined how they were working with like-minded governments. You don't say. The issue of the pandemic, around which many of these debates revolved, is actually the perfect illustration of its dangers. I've no doubt that most people attempting to tackle that issue were doing their best, but they were facing a novel situation they had no experience in, and they were making it up as they went along. In such circumstances, it's essential for there to be a dialogue, for challenge, critique and discussion to not just be permitted, but to be encouraged. And the fact that it was so widely repressed, with no consequences, sets an alarming precedent. As is usual in such cases, there's no contrition, no remorse, no pushback, and no lessons that have been learned. Like socialism, they'll likely just do the same thing over again. The greatest issue of all over the control of free speech, and the strongest argument against it, is who gets to decide. Do we trust politicians to have the power to literally control thought, to decide what's true or not? Because they've shown a marked inability to perform this task in recent years. And of course, the sort of individuals who want to control free speech are the very last people who should be handed that power. Because free speech has always been a thorn in the side of tyrants and dictators. And all history's great despots have made a priority of stamping on open expression. It's free speech that corrodes power structures. Without it, Christianity wouldn't have spread through the Roman Empire. Copernicus wouldn't have dispelled geocentrism. Luther wouldn't have nailed his 95 Theses up in Wittenberg. And we'd never have had the Reformation, the Glorious Revolution, the Enlightenment, or the American Revolution. Today's advocates argue that free speech is the servant of colonialism and white supremacy. But this would have been news to Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Nelson Mandela, who were all passionate advocates of open expression. And of course, the repression of free speech, from the Spanish Inquisition to Nazi Germany to ISIS, is the backbone of all the worst despotisms in history. The inconvenient reality is that the truth can only ever be approached through debate and discussion. All ideas must be tested in the bear pit of the public arena, and must stand or fall on their own merits. So the attempts of these arrogant little tin-pot tyrants to control discourse, to hold a monopoly on truth and misinformation, is not just an appalling affront to human dignity. It's the most counterproductive approach imaginable. They're not protecting reality. They're preventing us from ever unearthing it. And never mind their sickening arrogance to imagine that they, and they alone, should have the power to adjudicate on what everyone else is allowed to say, or hear, or think. It's none of their damn business what we say or think. And they have no right at all to control what we hear, except the rights they've granted to themselves. Those conferred only by their narrow-minded and monstrous hubris. Yet these plans have been rolled out across the globe, despite the manifest harm this controlling agenda has caused in the last few decades. It's incumbent on all of us to resist this with every fibre of our beings. Let the chorus of opposition be deafening. If you want to support this channel, please like, subscribe, and think about buying my books. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they go into topics like this in much greater detail. They're available on the links below. Please do feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.